Mills and Tiffany Score gave birth to a baby girl after IVF treatment through a fertility center in Orlando, only to discover that the child wasn't biologically theirs. Now the Florida couple has learned that they will get to keep custody of their 6-month-old daughter. Our Lionel Moyes with the details on how they reached an agreement with the baby's biological parents.
Hi everyone, welcome back to another React video. Today, Debbie and I are going to be discussing the custody agreement that was reached following an IVF mix-up case that we discussed back in March. Before we dive in, can you please like, subscribe and ring that notification bell.
Mills and Tiffany Score gave birth to a baby girl after IVF treatment through a fertility center in Orlando, only to discover that the child wasn't biologically theirs. Now the Florida couple has learned that they will get to keep custody of their 6-month-old daughter. Our Lionel Moyes with the details on how they reached an agreement with the baby's biological parents.
A custody agreement and an IVF mix-up that left parents confused and the fate of a little girl in limbo.
The parties have in person agreed to all of those terms.
According to court documents, Tiffany Score and Stephen Mills will keep permanent custody of their daughter Shay after reaching an agreement with the baby's biological parents. The couple discovering they weren't genetically related to Shay after giving birth to the little girl who was not white.
Tiffany underwent a C-section, and it was a very difficult birth. But ultimately, it produced a beautiful little girl. A little girl who, much to their surprise, had a very different appearance than what they had expected. It became very apparent within a short period of time that the child that they had born was not their child.
The couple went through IVF with an Orlando clinic, implanting what they thought was one of their embryos. Genetic tests ultimately confirmed they were not Shay's parents.
Shay is an absolutely beautiful little girl. They fell in love with her.
The couple filing a lawsuit against the fertility clinic and the doctor. The clinic saying in a January statement, "We will continue to assist in any way that we can, regardless of the outcome of the investigation." Genetic testing is now being done on another embryo of theirs.
This remaining embryo, and that is resolved to the point that
I hope to goodness that this is a very rare case, as we discussed back in March. But it's there are a few little statements that was said there in that opening statement. This is a beautiful little baby girl that's been born to a set of parents that they've grown to love for 6 months now. And the thought of them losing their child that they've nurtured, cared for, loved and adored, etc. You know, the consultant there said this is a beautiful baby girl. And I think that's testament to all the people that have been involved in this case, to really put that child forefront and uppermost in all of the proceedings that's taken place so far. I think the early recognition that the child with a different colour was very apparent right from the very beginning. Didn't say to them, we don't want this baby, we don't want to take this baby home. They took that baby home and they cared for and nurtured her and raised her as their daughter. Regardless of what their thoughts might have been at the time, which must have been really confusing and distressful at times, maybe. But they overcome all of that and raise that child as their own. So how could a court ever come to a decision to take that child away from them and to give it back to the original biological parents? I don't know. What do you think? What's your thoughts? Yeah, I mean, I think totally agree with what you're saying there, Debbie. And it also kind of resonates, I think, with a lot of the advice that we give to intended parents who are going through a surrogacy journey, who might be using donor eggs or sometimes donor sperm, and worrying about, will we still love this child? Will we still bond with this child if I don't have a biological link with this baby? And I think, we as an organisation at MSJ often say to people, the love and the bond for the baby is developed from even before conception, and actually the DNA that goes into that is secondary to the intention of creating a family that is going to be filled with love and care. The DNA
doesn't really come into it. And obviously for some people it is important. Now my camera's died. Sorry.
Yeah, Gemma, I completely agree with you. And I quite often say when I'm talking about using donor gametes about nature versus nurture.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's a real classic term to use and to give sort of some sort of reassurance to the IPs that when they're, you know, either, you know, obviously within surrogacy, they're relying on another woman to give birth to them. But that essentially is a child that they're going to bring into the world. They are going to be those parents right from the moment that baby's born, and nurture and love and care for that baby. Like even when we start to talk about characteristics when they're choosing donors, to not get too hung up on, you know, the education background of their donor or the, you know, what this person likes to do, because they are going to influence their child. You know, the peers that child meets, the children that they play with in the nurseries or kindergartens are going to really strongly influence those children. So it really is nature versus nurture, and to be really considerate of that. And that's so very well demonstrated in this case. And I'm so glad that they've come to this conclusion that it's, you know, not a break heart story that where a child is wrenched away from its parents that they've loved and cared for over 6 months.
Yeah.
Another embryo of theirs.
This remaining embryo, and that is resolved to the point that we now have it. We plan on testing it.
Attorneys requesting the case remain open until that is complete, which could take about 6 weeks.
And our thanks to Lionel for that. We will track it. The identity of Shay's biological parents is being kept confidential now. Tiffany and Stephen say that while they will raise Shay as their own, they intend to continue to foster a relationship and friendship and trust with their biological parents. All right, let's talk more about this with legal contributor and criminal defense attorney Bernarda Villalona. So were you surprised that the couple was allowed to keep custody of their daughter?
I was surprised that they were able to reach a mutual decision without fighting it out, without duking it out inside of the courthouse, because Lord knows that it would have taken many years for a decision to have been reached to ultimately settle the decision as to the question as to who is the legal guardian or parents of this embryo, of this child. So it's great that they actually reached the decision, because this would have been taking many years before a decision would have been made. And I'm sure that both sides would not have been happy with that decision.
So how liable can this fertility clinic, be here, held clinic?
Well, definitely in terms of the fertility clinic, there are various claims that these parents can go after. Actually, both set of parents can go after this clinic where, in terms of medical malpractice, in terms of, most importantly, emotional distress, because you can't fathom in terms of how much emotional distress these parents are going to feel, always having that question as to whether this child will really accept them as them being the parents of that child. Also, to have the question of how long will this draw out? Will there be anybody else that will be questioning these parents, that even though they're not genetically connected to this child, questioning whether they are the parents of this child? And also, let's not forget, Kira, that there is an issue in terms of that the child is not of the same race of the parents. So this is something that's going to be lingering in terms of questions that this child as well as these parents are going to be facing for the rest of their lives.
Is there a chance?
I think she does bring up a really valid point there. We know society can be quite cruel. Children can be quite cruel going through schools, etc. And having a mixed race child to a white Caucasian couple could indeed bring up some future comments that they're going to have to deal with. But I think the fact that they've made this really out of court decision to bring this child up as their own, they're already in that space. They're already making that conscious decision that, you know, they're prepared for the next steps and what's going to come. And I hope that they get the right support from the various professionals, etc., to help them support them in the future, and what type of bias, I suppose, that their child and them as parents could potentially take on board. You agree, Gemma?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, how lovely and heartwarming is it to think that all 4 of the people, the parents, grown-ups involved in this case, didn't have to go to court and fight this out. They were all very clearly focused on what's best for this child. And I think it's lovely that and quite unique, that they're able to continue a relationship, and their intention is to stay in touch. And I think that's a really lovely reflection of a modern family structure, which is just lovely to see.
It's quite beautiful, and it's like the legal representation here. She's just gobsmacked, isn't she? She's really taken back and said, "I'm really surprised that this decision was made and that they did it out of court." But that just, that strength of love for a child will override anything, won't it? That's what's coming forward here in this case.
Yeah, it's lovely.
Change their minds in the future and actually want to have their biological child?
Well, there's already been a decision or a settlement that has been reached by the both of them. But so because that settlement has already been reached, or actually an agreement between the both of them, highly unlikely that will change. But you have to think that maybe the child may request in the future to have that changed.
Bernarda, thank you.
I think we should close, Gemma, on that. From my own perspective, working clinically within an IVF environment for the last 30 years, this type of scenario really is incredibly rare.
Yeah.
The protocols and processes within an IVF laboratory are pretty strict. But there's double witnessing, there's RI witness tagging. It's very rare that a gamete could go onto a bench or a table or under a microscope, under a hood within a laboratory without being assigned to a couple, without knowing that there potentially could be a mistake in the wrong embryo being put into that dish, because alarms would be all over the place within that laboratory. So I think just to get that message out, yes, this is a very sad circumstance that thankfully has had a really positive outcome, but just to really reiterate that this is a very rare occurrence. And I think just touching on that last comment then about, what do you think the child might want to know in the future? And I think because of the race difference, there obviously may well be questions from an earlier age. And I think this couple have made this incredible decision that they hopefully have the right infrastructure around them to help support them when their daughter starts asking the questions about, who's my real parents and where does that come about? Whether they decide to be open and transparent from an earlier age and have those conversations so the child's questions don't need to be answered because she already knows what they are. So preempting things before it comes. And so then that child is more prepared at their nursery, their schools, to have a better understanding. Who knows what that child will want to know in the future. But I think if that couple's loving, guided parents, then hopefully they have all of the tools around them, support around them to help them understand what happened and what that future looks like.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. I think that again is often a worry for intended parents going through surrogacy of, what are we going to tell our child? When should we tell our child? How should we tell them? And just as you said, Debbie, my advice to intended parents is always just be open. Children are very capable of understanding different family nuances, different structures from a really, really young age. And providing they've got that support and love and trust within their immediate family and, social circle, that really helps the child to adjust very naturally into whatever their family dynamic is. And having that open dialogue with the child just allows them to ask questions to those people that they trust, and they know that they'll get a straightforward answer from, and that will help them to be more resilient if they do face any awkward situations from other children or other adults even as they're growing up. It seems like this little one has got a good setup for that already, so that's good.
Yeah, a very interesting story, and I'm really pleased that such a positive outcome from it. But I hope, going back to the fertility clinic, that they really do address what occurred at that point and how that mix-up was allowed to happen, so that they can really delve down into their processes and make sure that that doesn't happen again to another couple. Because, were that to happen to a different couple, it could be a very, very different outcome.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much for listening to us on our comments on that very recent case. I just want to please reiterate, for any of you listening that are going through your own IVF journey or surrogacy journey, to please, that this really is a rare occurrence. And if you've got any doubts or you're unsure about any of the processes within your clinic, then please put your hand up and ask them. Every clinic will not mind you asking the question, and to have good understanding about what the processes are through the laboratory and how your gametes, your eggs and your sperm and your embryos are being protected. This was a really positive outcome from this story, and I hope that the reassurance from that, having those conversations with your clinics at very early points, helps you on your onwards journey through your IVF processes. If you enjoyed our chat today, then please do like, subscribe and ring that notification bell, and we'll see you again next time.